Hello, I'm Jack Blanchard.
And I'm Dasha Burns. It is Monday, June 30th.
And this is the Playbook Podcast. And we are not in our houses.
No, we're not. We're together in person, and we are in Aspen for the Aspen Ideas Festival.
We are high up in the Rocky Mountains. This is my first ever trip to the Rocky Mountains.
Is this your first time feeling at real altitude?
Yeah, I had like one margarita last night, and I woke up feeling terrible.
You were party Jack. You were party Jack.
I didn't realize that this was a thing, drinking at altitude. I'm learning very fast. Anyway, it's beautiful. It's wonderful to be here. We've had fun, haven't we? We've done lots of different panels and had interesting conversations with people here.
Jack rode in a Ford Bronco up a mountain.
It was all American and it was absolutely brilliant. Sadly, I am flying back to DC this morning, but you're sticking around.
You. Yeah, sticking around, doing a couple more panels. Should you all be interested, I'm doing a panel on Ukraine later today. And Jack and I, we hosted a panel, just him and I chatting about the big, beautiful bill. And Jack did a great panel with some TikTokers, and I did a panel on the future of warfare. So a lot of dynamic conversations here in Aspen.
There you go. And let's have another one, or at least try and have another dynamic conversation.
Let's try. We got more in us, I think.
We'll do our best. The headlines this morning, obviously the big story is the big, beautiful bill, as we are contractually obliged to call it. We're expecting vote-a-rama to start in the Senate this morning. And that means that if it's going to pass the Senate, that could happen late tonight or it could happen tomorrow morning. I have to say, this is a moving target, this story, and it's been moving very rapidly. It's even possible that it will have changed a little bit between the time of us recording this and then editing it and getting it out. But as things stand right now, as we have this conversation, that is where it's at. And that will be the main thing that Dasha, you and I will talk about on this podcast. But I just want to flag two other things before we get into the world of how big and how beautiful. Other things we'll be watching today and this week, Middle East and Iran. Donald Trump told us that he was going to have meetings with Iran this week. Yeah. Does anyone think that's going to happen? I mean, the Iranians didn't seem to know very much about it when they were asked about it.
Yeah, with so many proclamations that the president makes when it comes to these negotiations, I often wonder, like, how much is it a tactic? How much is it a reality? I recall that he had told some reporters that he had spoken to President Xi before he'd even spoken to President Xi. And that was all part of like an art of the deal's strategy maneuvering. So, I don't know. My crystal ball when it comes to this stuff is really difficult with President Trump because he's playing his own game here.
He sure is. And it's an interesting one to watch. The interesting stories breaking about this still, this conversation about how badly damaged the Iranian nuclear facilities were by the American strikes is continuing to be debated very closely. The Washington Post had a very interesting story that they broke on Sunday. They said they've been made aware of a communication interception done by the US Secret Services, which is Iranian officials discussing it and saying that not that much damage had been done. The White House is pushing back incredibly hard on this story, as they have pushed back incredibly hard on other stories about this, but it adds to what one side of the argument would say is a growing, if limited, body of evidence that maybe this wasn't as clear-cut a triumph as the White House has insisted throughout.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I spoke with General David Petraeus at Aspen yesterday, and his assessment was like, look, first of all, it's early to be making any super strong proclamations either way, but he says with everything he knows about how this stuff works, and there are details that like we laymen's are not experts on when it comes to what each of those sites actually held and why the kind of damage that we did, even if it wasn't a full obliteration, would set back Iran significantly. And he actually said if he were President Trump, he would have let Israel kind of go after Iran a little bit more before we went in there. But overall, he believes between what Israel has done to limit their capacity and what we did, it's been effective.
And the thing that just doesn't ever quite has made sense about this is the line from the White House is, it's been obliterated, but then the next breath is like, and anyway, it's all under a mountain. How could anyone possibly know?
Right.
And therefore, it's like, yeah, right.
Those
so
are the,
you don't know.
The messaging from the White House has been messy on this, and I don't think. And the thing is, we know how Trump talks, and it's different than how experts talk. Like the word "obliterated" is not in the vocabulary of a General Petraeus or of anyone in the intel or military community, because it is early, and what does obliterate even mean in this circumstance? So I think this is another situation where taking Trump not literally but seriously in that regard.
Okay. Third thing to flag before we get onto the big and beautiful bill is there'll be some very interesting court action today. We're expecting more from the Supreme Court this morning. Of course, that landmark decision on Friday is still very fresh in everyone's mind, and we don't really yet know how that's exactly going to play out, but the expectation is that it's going to release some of the shackles on the president that we've seen the courts impose over the last few months. Today will be slightly less significant from the Supreme Court. We're expecting them to set out some more of the cases that they're going to hear in the fall. We may get a couple of other decisions from the Supreme Court today as well. I would say more interesting, though, this afternoon in New Orleans, the appeals court is going to hear the Alien Enemies Act case. You'll remember that this was the 18th century piece of legislation that Donald Trump and Stephen Miller were using. This was Stephen Miller's big idea to sort of declare an emergency situation and claim that America was being invaded, and therefore they could really just throw people out of the country very quickly and with very little process. That case has still been working its way through the courts. Today's hearing is a big one. It's the first appeals court hearing, one step removed from Supreme Court. So I have no idea what's going to happen, but there will be lots of people tuning in this afternoon.
Yeah, this is a huge deal, first of all, because immigration is one of the president's top priorities, and that is where they have been most aggressive in pushing the boundaries of what is and isn't legal. It's also happening against the backdrop of the Supreme Court giving the executive branch just way more power than we have ever really seen. And those two things in concert, I think, are massive and makes watching what happens with Alien Enemies Act case, even more important.
Should we get on with the main event, though? Everyone's been talking about this bill all weekend. It's very much going to be center of attention in DC today. Voter-armor, as I'm sure most of our listeners know, is a arduous and rather strange process, but is going to play out, it looks like, through most of Monday and maybe into Monday evening as well. Dash, at the end point, though, the Senate's going to vote this through, right? I mean, is this going to pass?
The White House, folks I'm talking to in the West Wing, are very confident it will. I mean, earlier this weekend, one senior White House official told me it's pretty simple. You either vote to end your career or not.
Brutal.
So no mincing words there. And look, there's been some arm twisting. There's been some golf diplomacy. The president spent much of the weekend golfing with some of the holdouts. This is tough for Republicans. It's tough for leaders of both chambers, because what we saw over the weekend was, in order to placate some of the moderates, you probably piss off some of the conservatives. What the likes of, Ron Johnson are concerned about, which is spending, goes against what someone like Senator Tillis, who we now know is retiring in the wake of all of this, but others as well, Paul and even Senator Josh Hawley, who voted to keep on with the debate, but we'll see where he lands. In order to placate them, they're worried about Medicaid cuts. So it's just a really tough pill to swallow. And this is also a bill that is one big, beautiful bill, as we've been saying, which means that all of the things you're voting yes for go together. So there's plenty of stuff in here that Republicans love across the board, but there's plenty that each of them have serious problems with and are going to have a very hard time selling to their constituents. But you can't vote yes on part of it and no on another part of it. That's both the challenge and the quandary of putting it all into one piece of legislation. I just keep marveling at that idea that was laughed off early on, but here we are.
People said it was impossible, and yet here we are on the cusp of it potentially happening this week. However, hasn't happened yet, and even if the Senate does vote this through tonight or tomorrow morning, it's going back to the House in modified form, and we're hearing from House Republicans there's plenty of groups not happy, and as you say, worryingly for the Republicans, on both sides of the argument. Heard from the House Freedom Caucus today, complaining very bitterly about increases in spending, increases in deficit as they see it. Hearing also from House Republicans, obviously a different group, worried about the cuts to Medicaid, say they now go much further than they wanted to go. Some of them claiming they won't vote for it. Let's see.
I have a hard time believing, given everything we've seen from this Congress when it comes to doing what they're told by President Trump, that anyone's going to go against the grain here. I mean, look, the president and the people around him that are kind of his bulldogs have also made plenty of examples of people who have tried to go against Trump. And that has been deliberate. And that is a machine that was built up over the course of the last 10 years and got sharper and better during the campaign and is now in full swing now that he is in power. And they have gotten very good at bullying people into submission or just out of this world altogether.
Right. And let's talk about the big one that happened this weekend, right? Like Tom Tillis, obviously an independent-minded Republican, but one that has been winning a purple state, said he voted against the bill and he's out and he won't be running again next year. And that is going to be a really big story, not just this week, but in 2026 as well, because that is shaping up to be a really interesting Senate battle now in North Carolina.
I am hearing from little birdies all around that the president's daughter-in-law, Laura Trump, might just be running for that seat. I'm hearing strongly, looking at, considering. We'll see, but you can bet that if she does decide to run, she will have the entire MAGA machine and the president very much behind her.
Goes without saying, and will also draw an enormous amount of media attention to that battle. On the other side, lots of Democrats want Roy Cooper to stand, the former governor, very popular figure in that state, would be seen as having a real shot at an open seat, could shape up to be one of the most interesting fights, maybe the most interesting fight of next year if it plays out that way.
Absolutely. And back to the bill, too, what happens with this big, beautiful bill, how it resonates with voters, who wins the messaging fight on that is going to play a huge role in how so many of these races turn out. And this is why it's so difficult for Republicans right now, because they are stuck between a rock and a hard place. They've got President Trump looking at them saying, you better get this done for me. But they also have constituents on the other side who they know that will likely have some issues with some of what is in this bill, because there's a whole lot in this bill. And they are having to make that calculus. And it's a big challenge. And how Republicans navigate this, especially leading up to midterm season kicking off, is going to be crucial.
The cuts to Medicaid spending, according to the CBO analysis, we're talking about nearly 12 million people in America losing their health insurance by 2034. That is a huge number of people. The Republicans dispute it, but, the money's going somewhere. And so, of course, if you know that that's going to affect your area, and especially if you're in a marginal seat, it's going to be very hard to sell that to constituents.
Yeah, the thing that Republicans have been selling fairly effectively is the work requirements, right? They've been all over every cable network, every news platform saying no one should have a problem with the idea that if you are an able-bodied young person, you should be either working, trying to get a job, getting an education, proving that you are participating in society in some way in order to get this benefit from the government. But the problem is, of course, there are a whole lot of experts in this field that say it's not that simple. And there are plenty of reasons why folks who do need Medicaid will now have much greater hurdles for ensuring they get those benefits. The question is, how long does it take for those millions of Americans to feel this practically? Because until that happens, it's going to be a battle of message. And can Democrats, who are crying foul right now, can they take this and run with it in a time when there isn't a messenger and they haven't been able to find a message just yet? Is this it? Is this the opening? And can they take advantage of it?
I was sat yesterday morning watching Senator Mark Warner, the Democrat senator, on one of the Sunday politics shows. And he was talking about this bill. He was like, you can put any lipstick you want on a pig. It's still a pig. I'm not sure I buy that. I think the GOP could spin this in a successful way. I think there is an opportunity for them to do it, but there's equally a big opportunity for the Dems here if they can land that message. And as you say, if they can find someone that voters will listen to and believe and accept, and that's what they just don't really have at the moment.
And let's not forget, all of the other things that are in this bill are a part of this conversation too. We're talking huge amount of money for immigration and Trump's mass deportation plans, which, again, depending on how that is all executed, is going to have an impact. There's the stripping of some projects that had been funded by the Inflation Reduction Act that might now be taken out of there. We still don't know what it's ultimately going to look like, but there's a lot of stuff here that could have a massive impact, for better or for worse, for Republicans.
Absolutely. And with most of them, the tax cuts being another one, again, you'll see this thing, both sides feel like they have an argument to sell on this, and we will watch politicians arguing about the pros and cons of this bill, I'm afraid, Dasha, not just this week, but for the next 15 months or so. Yes, exactly. We'd better leave it there, I think. That's all we got time for on today's Playbook podcast. We have much more news and analysis in today's Playbook newsletter, which you can find at politico.com/playbook. And we'll be back tomorrow.
Thanks for listening.
Have a great Monday.